Hello. Hardly had I finished uploading my video about the Oscars, critiquing the dresses. If you haven't seen that, you've missed a treat. And what was it, that side or that side, whatever. I'll put a link to that video on this one. Hardly had I finished uploading it when I was looking at my Twitter account and came across a post, either by the Washington Post, I don't remember actually, or somebody else quoting the Washington Post. But anyway, it was this: is Hugh Grant rude or just British? I take exception to both of that. I'll explain in a minute why. But anyway, whoever was quoting it, I was surprised at the way the Washington Post handled this matter, and I suppose I shouldn't have been, because the Washington Post, like most of Democrat America, thinks not much of the American working classes, and so is quite happy to side with a British snob against an undereducated American. And I think that's pretty despicable of them. I mean, you can say she's uneducated, you can say she's not that bright, but Hugh Grant was being rude. He was being very rude. So before I go on, I should introduce myself, because that's the only polite thing to do, isn't it? I'm Granniopteryx. I'm on YouTube, Rumble, BitChute and Minds. You'll find all the links in the description. I'm also on Twitter, Gab and Parler. I let you know when I've uploaded a new video on Twitter, Gab and Parler. That's because YouTube's a little bit careless about that. I would appreciate it if you would like this video and share it, and if you would subscribe. If you think you're subscribed, again, YouTube drops subscription sometimes, so just check that out. And you can also help me financially. There's a bouncing coffee mug there. All the links, there are 3 of them, all the links are in the description. Right, let's just talk about the purpose of good manners. What's good manners for? What, to tell you to cock your little finger when you're drinking a cup of tea? No, that's not good manners, that's pretentiousness. Good manners is taking into consideration whomever you're with. It's not polite to make the other person uncomfortable unless, of course, they have already tried to make you uncomfortable. So this is exactly what Hugh Grant was doing. This poor girl here was, what's her name? Ashley Graham. She's apparently a model. Yeah, I know that. No, I don't. Ashley Graham is obviously not too bright and not too educated. It's a bit difficult to know whether she is actually all that bright, but the fact that she couldn't wing it when she saw he wasn't answering her questions the way he was supposed to means that she didn't have much lateral thinking or wasn't accustomed to that. She had a list of questions like, where are you going after the ceremony? What will you wear? I mean, what will you wear is obviously a question that should be aimed at women. It's hardly something that's going to be aimed at men with any useful outcome. Okay, so she was going through a list of questions that she'd probably memorised the night before, you know, going through the list and talking about it. Look, I don't blame her for any of this. She's a television or media personality, and she doesn't have to be Einstein. She just does what she does. And Hugh Grant could have helped her a little bit. He could have gone with the flow, but he didn't. And he treated her like a rude schoolmaster, actually. So he was on the not red carpet, and they say he was just being British. No, he was being rude. He was being rude in any language, in any country. That was rude, the way he was acting. She was obviously not as capable, or perhaps not even as media savvy as he was. And he was taking full advantage of that to make a fool of her, when he could have just helped her along and been a bit generous. Grant went viral online for his evasive answers in a brief interview with model Ashley Graham. They weren't evasive, they were just rude. They were just rude. They were curt, they were short, and they were unhelpful. That's rude. In an interaction dubbed on social media as deliciously awkward, I didn't think so, as she struggled to engage the Notting Hill star. Asked by an upbeat Graham whom he was most excited to see win, he replied, "No one in particular." Well, that's fair enough. He's allowed to say that. Shifting the focus to fashion, Graham chirpily asked which designer he was wearing. I don't think she did that. She said, what will you be wearing for the... Because he talked about Vanity Fair. I'll get to that in a minute. He talked about Vanity Fair. So she said, well, what will you be wearing for the after party or whatever? And he said, because she didn't understand the Vanity Fair reference, and he said, just my suit. And then she said, who made it? Yeah, I didn't catch that either. And then she started talking about glass onions. So she'd obviously been told, Hugh Grant, glass onion, ask him about that. And then he said, well, I was only in there for 3 minutes or 3 seconds or whatever it was. Okay, so he was being very unhelpful. He could have been a lot more conversational. I mean, this girl is trying to make a career for herself. She wasn't well prepared and she's not well educated. Obviously, you'll see that in a minute. But it wasn't for Hugh Grant to make a fool of her in front of the cameras, which is what he seemed to be trying to do. And Grant has made a huge fool of himself, by the way, in front of the cameras. You'd think he'd be a little more sympathetic to somebody who is a lot less immoral about her own foolery. Yeah. Right, a lot of Americans have said he was doing bad, but what got me was the rather sympathetic way the Washington Post approached him. They should have fried that guy. Okay, Hugh Grant doesn't mean to be rude. Oh, yes, he did. And I'll get to that, yes. But this is how it feels to be British and confronted by absurdly enthusiastic American extroverts, another said. Well, it's true. I mean, she came at him like some sort of a puppy, like a, full of what snobbishly could be called, American enthusiasm, this cheerleading type of stuff, which is not fashionable in Britain. That's true. But he was in America. So he knew the sort of thing that she was doing. He is aware of that sort of culture. And he was in her country. So he could have just been a bit tolerant of that, even if he didn't like it that much. Now, just a minute. Let's just get down to here. They talk about British humour, which they should have spelt H-U-M-O-U-R, if they're talking about British humour, and the sort of self-deprecating humour that they use. See, yeah, that's all right. But he wasn't being self-deprecating. Okay, he wasn't boasting about his career, but he was also being unhelpful to her and making her uncomfortable. And that's rude. I'm using that word rather a lot, aren't I? So what he said was yet another culture clash. They refer to it as a culture clash. No, he knew what he was doing when he said Vanity Fair. And he knew that would be embarrassing. He knew she wouldn't know what he was talking about. And then he could show his superior education. I'll bet you anything that Hugh Grant has, well, I won't bet you anything, but I will bet that a small amount, that he has "be kind" somewhere on one of his tweets or whatever. Hashtag "be kind," something like that. Well, he wasn't being kind to her. But that's the thing about the left, and I'm quite sure that he's on the left because of the way he was acting. He wanted to show how superior he was. Now, let's go to Vanity Fair. It's fascinating, he said. The whole of humanity is here. Well, that's not true. It's Vanity Fair, he quipped. And then the Washington Post makes reference to the 1847 novel by William Makepeace Thackeray, which satirises rampant ego, class and consumerism. Actually, no. And that's where the WAPO got it wrong. Vanity Fair originally was a place in a book called Pilgrim's Progress, which was written by well, I don't know, would you call him a philosopher, John Bunyan, who put a character called Christian, the clue is in the name, on a life journey to the celestial city. And at one point he comes to a place called Vanity Fair. And the people, well, a town called Vanity, and they have a fair that goes on all year. And the whole point about the fair is it's full of ephemera. The things people wear, the things people do, they flit in and then they flit out. They are completely time related and they are discarded and new things take their place. They are not eternal, like the Christian philosophy that Christian really wanted to go towards. And yeah, anyone who's the Pinocchio story is in many ways a sort of a pastiche of Pilgrim's Progress. There are all of these temptations on the way to fulfillment, which in his case was becoming a real boy. In Christian's case, it was getting to the celestial city, being at one with God, finding Jesus, that sort of thing. But it's a similar idea, a life journey through temptation to sanctity. Then in the mid-19th century, Thackeray wrote a very big novel called Vanity Fair. And actually, although you can say it was about human shallowness, I always took it to be a chronicle of the history of Becky Sharp, who was a penniless orphan, who saw her way of making her life, of reaching her goal in life. So you could say that was Vanity Fair. Her goal was a material comfort. And she ended up in material comfort and considered very respectable. But to get there, she had to marry or become involved with powerful men because she had no other means of making her mark and carving her furrow, of ploughing her furrow in society without the backing of wealthy men or influential men. In many ways, it wasn't about vanities. It was about the invidious position that women were in if they were very intelligent but had no resources and no family. Now, it does end with something like Vanitas Vanitatum, who among us achieves what we want in life and having achieved it is really satisfied with it. That's what he talks about Becky Sharp having achieved respectability. But she became a very good person at the end. She was always working very hard in charitable institutions and donations and organisations and that sort of thing. So she actually ended up rather good for the world, even though it didn't come from her heart. And then he ends with talking about puppets. All of these characters in the novel, he says, they're all puppets. They've done their dance in front of you and now I'm going to put them back in the box and you can close the pages and that's the end of the entertainment. That's what he said in his novel. But the real Vanity Fair, the original one, was more likely what Hugh Grant was talking about when he was looking at all these overdressed, conspicuous consumers around him, all clawing for, well, yeah, you could say Becky Sharp clawing for their place in society, but completely obsessed with the present and things flowing in and then flowing out again, nothing permanent, nothing spiritual, nothing deep. And of course, I've forgotten her name now, this model, I'll find it. Yeah, Ashley Graham, she knew nothing of that. And she was one of the shallow floaters on society, floating in and floating out. And he was saying that. And that's not very nice to say to somebody who's just trying to earn a buck to interviewing you. So he was being very rude. He was being very ill-mannered. He wasn't being British. That's not how I see being British. I see, well, being British, being American, and being anything, being human is being polite, considering that you may have a wide and deep education, but somebody else may not. And she's just trying to make her way. So cut her a little slack, you oaf. Okay, well, that's my take on the viral Hugh Grant and Ashley Graham interview. Till next time. Why not treat yourself or a favoured relative or friend to these magnificent examples of merch? The mugs and t-shirts come in the granniopteryx design or Grambo with a firearm or the more deadly knitting needles. Go to www.granniopteryx.com and whatever platform you're watching this on, please click like, subscribe and share.